All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for sharing your weather with me and making me feel a little better about mine. Um, I'm really pleased to have you here today to join us with Roger and Amy. I'm Catherine Lawrence, and if you weren't here yesterday, I work with the Science Gateways Community Institute as one of the co-PIs running the community engagement and exchange area. And so we are responsible for pulling together the this conference. And so when I had the opportunity to invite this dynamic duo to come and speak, it was really great that they were willing to join us. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about them first and their background and expertise, and then we'll carry on with an interview format for today's session. So Roger is a chief scientist of the energy program at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, where he develops climate and energy technologies such as carbon dioxide capture. And as a result of his research, he holds 24 patents and has authored more than 100 publications. And I actually would encourage you to read his more lengthy and inspiring bio on SCED in the conference schedule, because he has quite an accomplishment, a list of accomplishments behind him. And Amy Aines has spent 40 years helping scientists, technologists, and business leaders communicate to get results. And she has worked in the telecom, wireless, tech, and biotech industries, applying her knack for translating complex technical concepts to make sure they're understood. And recently, she launched Talking STEM, a program of online courses to teach STEM graduates and professionals essential communication skills for making a bigger impact in their work. With their work. And she's very passionate about teaching communication, relationship building, and influence skills that most STEM graduates don't learn in school. So that is partly why we have her here today as well. And there's going to be a learning lab too, where you can follow up more on that, but we'll tell you more about that later. So together, this complementary pair have written Championing Science, Communicating Your Ideas to Decision Makers, which I have to say was such a pleasure to read that I enjoyed reading it in my spare time. It wasn't like work. This book goes beyond the demands of a typical career where you're submitting grant proposals, presenting to peers at a conference like here, but to acknowledge essentially that many scientists want to have a bigger impact, and creating that impact requires careful thought and design. And in the beginning of the book, they say, this book is intended to help increase any scientist's ability to make the case for excitement and bring decision makers and colleagues along to become part of doing great things. And so my experience is that gateways are often forward-thinking in their recognition that there could be a better way of doing things, whether that's providing something that's more reliable, robust, efficient, integrative, accessible, or community-minded. And Amy and Roger are here today to share how you can apply concepts from their book to your own mission to increase user adoption as well as funding for your gateway so that your entire community can do great things. So with that, off we go. Amy and Roger, I wanted to start out by asking, your book is clearly a passion project as much as it is an outgrowth of your combined expertise. And I'm wondering how it came about, and or what did you see that made it an urgent concern to get that book written when you did?
Well, I've spent my career at the National Lab, and a lot of it helping younger scientists try to get their ideas across. And in particular, at our lab, we have an internal funding opportunity every year. And I just watched people fail to understand that their colleagues at a national lab didn't understand the nuances of everything that they did in their specialty. And that when you're pitching to this internal funding, you have to understand that it's a wider audience, and you have to get your ideas formed up in a way that intelligent people who don't or aren't specialists in your field can understand them and embrace them. And then I met Amy, and when we were dating, I thought, wow, I want to write down some of these things. I want to write a book. And so I thought Amy's the perfect person to write this book with, because of course she's a professional communicator. I saw the problem and she had the solutions. And so we were actually driving down to Palm Springs to visit her father. And I knew I had her trapped in the car for the whole day. And I had actually made notes. I had my pitch already, like, I want to do this. And what did you say? You said,
I need to think about it. I'm not so sure. A book? Really?
The funny thing is that I really was not sure what she was going to say about writing a book. When I later asked her to marry me, I knew exactly what she was going to say. But the book was really uncertain. The book was a real pitch. So.
And it was a big project, and I was in between consulting gigs at the time, and I thought, oh, this man is so lovely. He knows I need something to chew on, something to do. But I had come from a world, especially in the wireless industry, and before that, I worked for a T1 multiplex manufacturer. So I'd always been in the orbit of scientists and technologists, and I could see how difficult it was often for them to translate the technical things they knew into words that made sense to the people who needed to buy from them or understand what they were talking about. So I absolutely agreed that there was a need.
Mm-hmm. And what sort of things were missing in terms of the kinds of skills that people weren't having to make that communication, or insights that they were missing?
It's interesting. So I studied communications. That was the program that I pursued in my undergrad and internships. And what I've come to appreciate is that we take it for granted because we talk all the time. And there's so much more to it. It can be so much more strategic when you recognize the importance of giving it some forethought. So from a skills standpoint, it's a combination of things. It's understanding what influences people. It's understanding how to use words to bring clarity. It's understanding how to tell whether someone is tracking with what you're saying. And especially in our Zoom world, it's understanding how to engage people. Where to start the conversation is a skill that isn't taught in school. And a lot of scientists and technologists are set up to fail because of how they're trained. You might say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, in school, we're rewarded for more and more detail. The longer paper you write, the bigger words you use. That's the thing that you're taught to do in school, particularly in science. And that's not the answer ever once you get out of school. Once you're talking to somebody who's not your major professor, you have to learn how to summarize, how to do something we call extracting the essence. What's the important part of the thing that you have to say? Start with the important part and then find your way down to the details.
So when you then sit down with a scientist to help them out and help them learn to communicate more effectively, where do you begin?
So I try to help somebody take things up to a much higher level. So as I've come to understand what gateways are about, for me, one of the most compelling things is access. You're giving people access. So I would ask the question, like, help me understand the biggest benefit. What is the main thing that this enables you to do? And when I start that conversation with people who are deeply embedded in the topic, they'll give me 5 long sentences describing all the functionality and rich features and capabilities. And I'll say, okay, we have to take it up a level. And I keep on saying, okay, how do we take that up a level? How do we get it to that essence, that core concept that is, the most fundamental to what this is all about? So if I've never heard of a gateway, and you begin to show me that it's about access to tools and capability, I'm going to immediately know without a doubt what that means.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Go ahead, Roger.
One of the things that scientists love to do, because we do it all day, every day, is to talk about how we're going to do these things that we're going to do. And when you're starting a conversation with a new decision maker, it's never about how, it's about what. What are you going to do? What are you going to deliver? What is the importance of what you're going to do? And it's so hard because we spent so much time on the how, and you want to launch into it right away, but it's never the right thing to start with.
So then what do you ask a client to help them build that picture for their funders or whoever their audience is in a particular case? Where do they begin with extracting that essence beyond? I mean, given that the how is what everyone is magnetized towards, right? And the what is sometimes maybe a little more abstract. What kinds of questions do you ask people?
Why does it matter?
Mm.
But what will this let people accomplish? What are the biggest benefits of what you
Mhm.
deliver?
Mm-hmm.
And if you were going to prioritize those benefits and think about them as they apply most broadly, where would you start? Because the other thing about gateways is there are a number of different benefits. But
Mm-hmm.
whenever you give me a laundry list to have to listen to and process, I can't stay with you because my mind is going to carry me places based on something you say, and then I'm not going to stay engaged. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason that figuring out the hierarchy of the message, what's most important, what's the biggest umbrella, that's why that's such an important starting point.
And limiting yourself to one most important message is such a struggle for scientists.
It really is.
And of course, because you have a dozen reasons, which you have to have because of the how. You need all that for the how. But to be able to say what's the single most important thing, and then to be able to focus yourself and say, but I'm going to have more than one thing I say, but the number, can you see my 3 there? 3.
Yeah.
The number is always 3. You shouldn't have 5 things. You shouldn't have 7 things. Often one thing is not enough. Just 3. And that's so hard to do because our brains are so full of important things. But when you're talking to a decision maker, you have to realize that their brain is not full of those things yet. And you want them to, walk away with an understanding and appreciation. You want them to emotionally like what you're talking about, to feel that what you're doing is important and not to be drowned by the details.
So how do you tailor that then? Like, how do you decide what those 3 points or 1 point might be? Or how do you help, how do you figure that out?
The first thing you do is you try to understand who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
This is so important. One of the things that Amy is terrifically good at, and I'm going to let her speak about this in a minute, is messaging. And when we say messaging, we mean what is the information you want to get across? What is your message? And so often when you talk to scientists, you look at their slides and you say, well, your message must be, look at all the work I did. That's not a message for a decision maker. So you have to say, well, what message are you going to get across to this person? And the very first thing to think about for that is, what do they already know? Are you talking to an NSF sponsor who's been in your field for 20 years and knows every detail of everything that's ever failed? Or are you talking to somebody from a philanthropy who just in general knows what's important? Are you talking to a senator who doesn't have any idea why it's important, needs it at the very highest level, a single sentence? So, but understanding what that person you talk to already knows is super important for getting across, for determining what your single point is.
Mm-hmm.
Amy's the queen of messaging. She does my messaging. It's terrific.
Well, and I also
Free, I'm sure.
I want to circle back. Oh yeah, lots of dinner types of conversations. I'm helping to solve climate issues on a nightly basis, and it's a great partnership. But I think the starting point from what Roger just said is something I want to circle back to because it's so vital. Recognizing who's listening and what's important to them, what they care about, is always the best place to start a conversation. And we don't want to leave you believing that you can't provide more specifics and details because they are important. It's just a matter of what order you go in and
Mm-hmm.
where you start. So if you're able to ascertain what somebody knows about gateways, what their biggest pain points might be in terms of their challenges in doing the research work they do, if you can get a read on that as a starting point, then you can formulate your message, and then you can tailor the way you deliver that message to really resonate with the person you're talking to.
Now, how do you do that kind of reconnaissance, so to speak? For especially, I've noticed when looking up information about people who work in the government, they don't always have like bios that tell you much about them or their background and so forth. Do you have any tips for how to scope that kind of information out?
Yeah, I do this a lot. And the very first thing is, especially when they're experts in your field, people at NSF or NIH, places like that, people who know these people. These people have been in the field. You can ask their friends. You can ask their the people you can ask their secretary. I do this all the time. I say, what does Commander Owens know about this? Have they ever touched this before? How do they like to get information? Do they like to read it? Do they like to talk about it? Those things are important, but asking is so important. And so many of us in science, including myself, are really introverted. And it's hard to say, oh, I'm going to ask somebody a question, but no one minds being asked a question. And particularly like a staff member or a secretary or a graduate student, somebody who works with somebody who's busy, they know it's very important for that busy person to use their time well. So they're delighted to tell you, oh, they like to do this, or they had this interaction, or this is important to them. If you're talking to a congressperson, which is something we all do a lot these days, maybe not all of us, but
not me.
Their staff members are very attuned to try and use their time well, and so they'll tell you exactly what they think and what they know, and that sort of filters down, and by the time you get out to the widest ranges of science, you can just ask the people who work with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the other benefit of trying to find out about who's listening is that you can look for things you might have in common with them. And with LinkedIn and Twitter, see if people post things, find out what they care about. It may not be directly related to your topic, but it might give you a point of entry to connect as person to person. And that becomes so important too, because people only say yes to people who they trust. And in order to be trusted, you have to create a connection with somebody. So there's a lot of interpersonal relationship dynamics that are really important in not only in encouraging somebody to become a member of a gateway or a funder to continue to fund your work. They've really got to trust you. So building rapport and connecting at a human level is an important dynamic to keep in mind too.
And it's an important thing to do first. And this feels funny when you're walking in to talk about science. But a terrific interaction a little while ago. We were going over to Apple Computer to talk to them about their climate policies. And my coworker who was driving with me, we realized halfway over that we didn't know who we were going to talk to. I'm like, oh, that's wrong. Quick, look him up. And we looked him up, and it turns out he has a master's degree in forestry. We're like, okay, that's pretty interesting. And so walked in, met him, we got our badges, we're getting coffee, and go, so how did a master's degree in forestry bring you to Yale? I mean, from Yale, bring you to Apple. And this led to a wonderful 2 or 3 minute conversation while we got our coffee and just building that rapport, becoming humans instead of some robots who just walked in the door.
That's a great story. I think it really highlights the point that the person who's listening to you also wants to be seen and heard, right? Which is really wonderful. And I love your suggestions about reaching out to staffers or coworkers, other people who worked with them, because it can be so hard to dig up that information. And that's a great idea. Now, you were mentioning earlier how, the people who are our program officers at places like NSF or NIH are exactly scientists like us. I mean, you're making a pitch to someone who knows your field probably, in a similar way, maybe not the exact same thing. So in what ways would talking to them be similar or different than talking to your peers or talking, to someone who's in a completely different sphere? Because it seems like it would be a tricky line to walk as far as knowing whether you're giving too much or too little to someone who is presumably an expert to an extent on what it is you're doing.
The thing you always want to think about when you're talking to someone who's going to make a decision about your life and your science, you want to make it easy for them. So much of what we've done through the course of science is making somebody drink from a fire hose. That's not fun. Imagine what that would be like. And so when you're giving a seminar, it's like, oh, really? I'm going to challenge them. I'm going to make them work hard to understand what I'm talking about. You don't want to make the decision maker work hard to understand what you're talking about. You want to make it easy. You want to do things like don't use acronyms that they might not know. Start with at the highest level, like we talk about with messaging. And even somebody who's an expert in your field, if they're at NSF, let's say, they're really busy. They're reading a lot of things all day. They're talking to a lot of people. They, to the extent that you can make it easy for them to understand what you're doing, you're going to get your message across faster than the next person. Remember, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be better than the other people who are competing with you.
Right.
And, but to the extent that you make that easy, it's very much a function of who you're talking to. Talking to the science officer, then they're going to understand, what went on in astronomy in the last 20 years. So you don't have to give them a background of that. Whereas if you're talking to this person at a philanthropy, they might not know that at all. So you do have to take that into consideration.
Amy, did you want to add anything to that, or no?
I think that it's important to recognize, again, that you're having a conversation. And I think sometimes what happens is we're so primed to deliver the entire pitch that we wind up and we go. And think of it more like a tennis game where there's volleying back and forth. And when you can ask questions and engage somebody and check in and say, so I've just given you a high level overview. I have plenty more detail I can use to describe this opportunity and why we're seeking this funding. Help me appreciate what matters most to you. What else do you want me to explain? Don't feel like you have to have it all premeditated. Give the person you're talking to an opportunity to help you give them what they need, because you won't necessarily know. And don't assume people have fully read a proposal. Be prepared to come back to what's important. And that's especially important with decision makers. We talk a lot in the book about how influence is a process. It's not something that happens, the switch flips and suddenly someone says, yes, we're going to fund you.
It's not Shark Tank. That actually doesn't happen.
So you have been focused on laying a case, right? And you've been focused on bringing all the right information to the decision maker. Don't expect they're going to remember any of that. You have to bring it back into the room when you're asking for that final decision.
One of the things that I think is super important is to be able to get the person you're talking to ask you questions, because it indicates that they're engaged. And your goal is to get the right information into their head. If they're asking questions, then they're telling you what information they need. And so if you're just spewing at them, you're not getting that feedback of what is it they don't know, what is it they don't agree with. You can adjust your pitch midstream if you need to. We all know how to do that, but you have to listen to be able to do that. And asking questions is hard to think about, but it's easy to do. What have you had any experience with this topic? That's an easy question to ask, right? And then people will tell you, and people always like to be asked questions.
Yeah, you mentioned in I think it was, I've looked at several things that where you've talked or written, so I'm not quite sure where I saw this, but you talked a bit about what you want to make sure you definitely ask someone towards the end of a session before you go, because you want to make sure that they're going to be on board. So, and how do you approach that?
Well, my mentor in learning to do these things was a man named Jay Davis, who actually was the first leader of a major government agency, DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. They do all the chemical weapons and nuclear weapons reduction around the world. And what he taught us was that when you get time with the decision maker, they expect you to ask something. They gave you the time because they're waiting for you to ask for something. And if you don't, you wasted their time. Now that may be a little harsh, but the point is that it's perfectly reasonable to have an ask ready, to be prepared. And of course, we think about money, and that's reasonable. If you're in there asking for money, ask for it. Tell them exactly what you need. What are they going to get for the money? How does it fit into their life? But you should always think about what your ask is. And many times, what you're there for is to understand more about what that person is doing, or how their program works, or what the funding cycle is going to be. And so for you to ask those questions and get that information is what they expect. And so have them ready and make the ask.
So another thing that we chatted about before coming here to this session is the idea of what happens when you're stuck in an elevator with someone, and you know there's someone important, but you weren't expecting to find them there. What do you recommend people do in that situation?
Well, elevator rides are often really short, and to suddenly try to bombard somebody with a lot of information when they weren't expecting to be standing there with you,
And they don't know who you are.
yeah, oftentimes will
Mhm.
not go well. So what you want to do is create an opportunity to have a future conversation. You want to
Mhm.
set the stage. And if you're on campus and you might be in a building where research is being done, and you know you're with a researcher that's somebody who could potentially use your gateway, wondering what kind of things are going on in your lab these days, what kind of struggles are you having, are there any tools you wish you had, finding a way to start a conversation, it can be helpful. And if somebody's a total stranger, then starting with something that's happening in front of you, like, you know COVID. It's an easy topic, right? Like, oh, you're getting a chance to be in your lab now. That's great. What kinds of things are you working on, right? Connecting your opening line to something that's happening that you're sharing with the person you're with is the
Mhm.
way to make it less awkward when you suddenly start up a conversation in an elevator.
Mhm.
Again, it's asking a question. The concept of the elevator pitch, I believe, is wrong. Um, I think you want to create a conversation. You want to start building a relationship with a person, and asking them a question is the best place to start that. Now, of course, it's an intentional elevator pitch that you know you're going to get to talk to this person, then you can plan your question carefully, and we call this the elevator question. But
Mhm.
um, and that's, for gateways, you can start with something really neutral. The experience question. I love this. Do you have any experience with gateways? And then you're going to get a sense from them, or yeah, I had a great experience with it, or oh, I had a problem with this, or no, I don't know much about it. That gives you a chance to now respond in it appropriately to what they know.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to see if people want to take a minute to contemplate, in your world, given the things you're working on and the people that you speak to, what kind
Mhm.
of opening question could you ask that would give you some insight into where this other person is coming from so you could tailor your conversation? That was the exercise idea we had, to try to
Yeah.
give you all something specific to take away here. What question could you ask? Just
Yes, why don't we do that? Let's have everyone take a minute or so to do that, and our trusty technical support will play some music during that period of time, so you won't feel lonely. And think about this for a minute, and then we'll resume.
and think about a specific person you want to have this conversation with, so
Hmm.
that you're really identifying a listener.
Great, thank you. I think Gabe is going to strike up the music.
Very quiet music.
Must be.
I could sing, but I'm not sure that.
Maybe a little quieter, Abe. Whoa, I'm hearing two songs at once. How strange. I just realized my watch isn't working. Ah.
The most important electronic object in my life is the clock that's just right there.
Ah. So, all right, I think that's probably a good minute. Oh, it was a little peppier than I was expecting to, but that's good. You're awake. So, all right. So, So let's, I'm wondering if there are folks in the audience who would like to talk and share what their question would be. And as you can see, Amy and Roger are actually really nice people and not harmful at all. And you could, you can either raise your hand from the participants area, that if you click on the participants button at the bottom, and then you can there's a raise your hand button, or you can put a question, you could put your question into the Google Doc. That's right, Mona, thank you for pointing that out. You could put that there in the shared Google Doc, or you could mention in chat that you'd be willing to be a kind of a test guinea pig to run your question by Amy and Roger.
And just to help kind of preview what we would love to do is hear your question and then hear a little bit about your gateway and how as a result of asking that question would you approach telling us about your gateway, and we'll come up with some kind of answer to your question to help with that.
Looks like we got someone starting up some space for questions. Here we go.
So we don't see your Google Docs. So.
Oh, Sandra says she's fine with being a guinea pig. That's awesome. Awesome. So Sandra, why don't we all, we'll spotlight you. We'll get you so everyone can see you there. Okay.
Okay, hi.
Hi there.
Yeah, hi, Roger. Hi, Amy. Good seeing you again.
Yes.
So yeah, I love the idea of an elevator question, just to saying that. I still like the idea of an elevator pitch, but I tell you later why. I come first. I'm first the guinea pig, as I promised. So yeah, I get into the elevator and there's this researcher who used science gateways like 7-8 years ago, made really bad experiences and never wanted to do something again with science gateways. So my first question would be then, which tools are you at the moment working with? So that would be the idea, just to keep it going. I know that he has already bad experiences, and these are the people who are the hardest to get again.
I like that because it's what we call a neutral question. It doesn't imply good or bad. It lets them have the playing field, lets them answer however they want.
Yeah, and you're going to get something really specific. So once you hear about the tools, and they may give you several, and then you get to decide where to anchor your elevator pitch. And I think I want to correct the record around elevator pitches. You do need a succinct way to talk about what you do. And that is often defined as an elevator pitch. Where we're coming from is that there's this tendency to feel like you have to just instantly deliver it. And we're just trying to create the context around it in a way that's strategic, that's really strategically oriented to understanding who's listening and what they care about. So we don't disagree that you need a succinct way to say what it is you do.
Oh, I fully agree to that. Thank you also for the feedback. Yeah, what I like about the elevator pitch, that is what I wanted to say, is that I have something in 3-4 sentences how to describe my work.
Yes.
And that I directly know it, because I think the hardest way for me is to say something in 1 minute, very distinctive, very succinct, and practicing that is good for me personally.
Absolutely. So if you asked that question and the answer you got back was, I'm using super computing power right now, and I'm using collaboration tools, how would you in any way change your elevator pitch if you were going to tell me about your gateway?
So if the answer would be collaboration tools, and I would ask what kind of exactly, and to know whether I know them, and whether I can get the bridge to, let's say, they would say, oh, yes, I use collaboration tools with chatting and Slack, and it's all integrated in one platform. And then I would be very careful saying, oh, this is something we are doing with science gateways nowadays also, because the development is much further now than it was 8 years ago where it was not always clear where the errors come from. The monitoring got better. We do something similar now with science gateways. That would be my pitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes me want to say, oh, so how is it different from when I used it before and it didn't work?
Yeah, and then I would go into more detail with, oh, the monitoring got better. Now we know, for example, if there's a hardware defect or something, HPC is not reachable, then the error is not in the science gateway, but in the infrastructure behind. So showing that science gateways had a problem sometimes because they didn't work, but it was the infrastructure behind it and not the technology itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're bringing up something else really important, which is empathy in your conversation. You know, when you get a read from somebody that they've had a bad experience and your goal is to help them appreciate it's time to rethink this, it's so important to be empathetic about what didn't work for them before trying to encourage them to take a second look, because that creates a person-to-person connection. And when I feel like you understand me, I'm going to be far more open and receptive to what you're going to say next.
Great.
One of the mistakes we make as scientists is to assume that if we deliver the facts, people will believe us. But people do not, if someone doesn't trust you, they're not going to believe what you say, no matter how many facts you supply. Now, if you're talking to an NSF project manager, he has a background to understand why to trust you. He has your resume, as you know, you have all the things that you've done over your career. But many times that's not true. And so this element of building even just a little bit of trust is so important in starting the rest of the relationship down the road.
And people are emotional beings first and foremost. A lot of our decisions get made at an emotional level and then get justified with our rational parts of our brain. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I think often difficult and challenging for scientists, because that's not the place you live most of the time. You don't spend a lot of time thinking about how you feel about something, but you know, the data's there. Dan Kahneman's research proves it. His great book, Thinking Fast and Slow, talks a lot about how people make decisions and how much emotional and gut reaction plays into a yes or a no.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for being a guinea pig, Sandra.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for playing this with me.
Yeah, so well, I want to make sure that before we go to questions, there's one of the recurring tools in your book that I think is just so valuable that I would love you to talk a little bit more about, is the 5-slide approach. Could you talk about that a bit?
So this is another thing that Jay Davis he literally beat it into us. Well, not literally. But he would insist that before we went to make a presentation, we reduce it to 5 slides. And why 5 slides? Well, because when you're talking to someone, you want to get all the important stuff up front. Why is what you're talking to something they want to hear? What are you going to do if you're making a proposal? Why are you the right team to make this proposal? And then what work are you actually going to do, and what money do you need to do it with? And condensing that into 5 slides is an incredibly hard thing to do, because we always think, oh, there's so many details I need to put in, but this chain of things that you need to include. Why is it important? What am I going to do? What am I actually going to add to the problem? Why is my team the right thing? And what am I going to deliver? If you say those all up front, then the rest of the talk, they have a foundation, they have a framework with which to understand what you're going to talk about. And
Did you want to add anything to that, Amy? Or
I'm just thinking about it from the standpoint of the problem that you help solve. I think that's a really key starting point in a conversation. And you know, what I've come to really appreciate about gateways is the multidimensionality and the kinds of problems that they solve. So it feels to me like that's a really important starting point. The other thing we haven't talked about that I think is also really key for this community is how do you prove the impact that gateways have, and bringing that into the conversation. So the idea of having just the core ideas up front and making sure you cover them first instead of walking people through, how you developed something and all of the functionality and features that it has, and waiting until you've gotten to slide 19 before you get to those key components Roger asked, is what typically happens. And that's why the 5-slide approach works so much better, is it sets the stage.
There's 2 times when the 5-slide approach will completely save you. The first is when it turns out that the sponsor you walked in to talk to loves what you want to do. And after the 4th slide, they're all like, yeah, let's do it. Okay, let's talk about how to go. And so instead of spending 55 minutes and having 5 minutes to talk about what the sponsor wants to do, you spent 5 minutes and you now have 55 minutes to talk about how they're going to spend their money on you. This is where you want to be, right? You want to be talking about this, planning this with them. And the second thing is when there's some major flaw that you didn't understand, you missed something that they didn't like, something that they needed to be different, but you can fix it. You can fix it live and find out, instead of letting them sit there and stew for 30 minutes and go, I don't think this is a good idea. And by that time, they're checking their mail and they're not paying any attention to you anymore at all. And you can just find out right away, what's the concern that you have up front. Oh, we've actually done a study on that. We know how to fix that. Or, that turns out that that's not a problem in our approach. And if you just get those little things out of the way, then you can use the time so much more effectively.
Yeah. So the first slide would be like, how would you frame that first slide? What would you call it? Like
the first slide is always, why is this important?
Okay.
And no, for anybody. I mean, I work in climate change, and so you need to think about what's important to them. I wouldn't walk into an NSF program manager and give them a breakdown of why I think climate change is important. That's the wrong place to start. But you go down a deeper level there. But and then once you've established something that you think is important to that person that you're talking to, then you're going to tell them what solution you're going to bring to that problem. Now, in a very academic, like around Gateway, the problem can often be that people don't have the tools, or they don't have the communication, they don't have the shared resources. That's pretty straightforward, right? And then in the next slide, you say, and my Gateway solves this for this community. And what you want to think about there is a gap. The sponsor always has a place that they want to go, and there's where you are today, and in between where you are today and where the way to go is a gap. You want to fill that gap. And if you think about how you're going to fill what that gap is and how you're going to fill it, you're going to have a successful pitch.
So just to recap, because I know that it's very helpful the way you frame it in the book. So you have the problem and what's important about this problem, and then a gap, and then how you're going to solve that problem, right? And then why your project is right for the job or your team, right? Is that so? In the case of Gateways, I know you often talk about why your team is right for the job. In the case of Gateway, would you say that it's the Gateway? Why is the Gateway right for what you need to do, or do you still talk about your team?
It's both in this case.
Okay.
And you have many times, if you're putting together a complex Gateway, you want to tell the sponsor that you have the right team, that you've touched all the right topics, that you have the computer people, that you have the discipline people, that you have the communications people. That's probably important there. But the essence of this is not exactly what each of these 5 things should be, but that it's a small number of things, and that you're trying to touch the important topics.
Yeah. Well, I like too that you, because I know in the book you say that you should make sure you also include that ask, which is what we forget to do, because it's awkward. It's sort of like, asking someone for money. I mean, that's what they're there to do, right? To give you support and funding. But that ask has to be in there as well, which is a good reminder.
And it doesn't always have to be about money. Sometimes it can be, what do you think of this idea? Or, who else do you know that might benefit from this?
Yeah.
What more would you like to see us create in terms of functionality with the funds that we're asking you to provide us, right? Like engage them, get them to care. Maybe they have a vision for something that, could help enhance what you're working on. So
I'll tell you my secret ask that I use all the time now, and that is when I'm talking to somebody who's really a high level person. and they're really actually at a higher level. I mean, I'm talking to a legislator or the head of a philanthropy or something. They're not actually going to deal with me directly. I ask them to introduce me to someone.
Mm.
And that is so powerful. When you just say, can you write me an email introduction to Joe over at this organization? That's totally powerful, and it's so easy for them to do, and they feel like they've done you a favor, and you've walked away with something really useful.
Really valuable. Yes, definitely. I want to make sure, so give our audience time to ask questions too. And I also want to make sure they have time to think about it. But if anyone has a question, oh, hey, we have a question ready right here. So Mike Zentner asks, do you have any suggestions for posters and poster sessions? I find nearly all of them to be so dense with information as to be bewildering. Is this appropriate for those settings, or should we all be rethinking how we create posters?
I love that you brought that up. I mean, we're big believers in it's time to rethink. And it takes us to a topic that we talk about a lot. Things have always been done a certain way in science, right? From day one, when you create your first science fair poster, you put lots of information up on it. But what you don't do is convey a clear message. So we absolutely believe that it makes sense to rethink posters. What's the message? What's the big aha that came from your work?
Big aha.
Yeah. What's the most striking finding? And the other thing that I think reveals itself in poster format is there's a lot about the process and how the research was done to demonstrate the rigor, right? And that's absolutely vital. But when you have a small space, if that's the focus, it's hard to know what to take away. And in a poster session where you're walking by and you don't have a lot of time to absorb, it's not a good format. So yes. And there's a guy who runs an organization called Animate Your Science. His name is Tullio Rossi, and he has poster formats, and he's a big proponent of rethinking the way posters are done so that there's a clear and compelling message. Are you going to put it in the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great. And then we can put it in the document.
Science. They do great work, and they have some really concrete recommendations about poster format. And that brings up another pet peeve of ours, the way people start presentations when they give talks. Almost always it's the formalities, thanking your sponsor, saying you're really glad to be there. Nobody's listening. They're tuning you out. When you get up in front of a group of people, you have an instant moment to really engage. And we are big believers that you've got to think about who's in front of you and what can you say to connect them instantly to your topic.
If you get up there and say, I want to start by thanking thy sponsor and all the collaborators, then you've already wasted the most valuable 15 seconds that you have. If you get up there and say, I'm going to tell you about a solution to a disease that's killing hundreds of Americans every day. Bang, you have got everybody's attention in the room.
Yeah.
You have to think about using that 15 seconds or 30 seconds. You have to use that time where you absolutely have everyone's attention. Use it well.
And you can come back around to the formalities, but whet people's appetite. What you're doing is creating this sense of expectation that people want to hear what you have to say next. And that takes some forethought to connect in a way that's going to be really meaningful to the people listening to you.
So Mona, you asked about the conclusion first on the poster. Absolutely. It should be up there in 65 font. There we go. See it? It should be readable from across the room. Remember that it's often hard to get up close to posters to read what you're doing. There's somebody standing there talking. By the way, if you're going to talk to somebody, move a little away from your poster, let other people read it. But you want people to be walk by and see the highlight. Think, why do I want to talk to this person? Remember, a poster is not a publication. It's not a place to have details about how you do your experiments. If someone wants to know details, they'll ask you. A poster is a place to have some images and fast things that people can understand why they want to talk to you. Why do they want to read your paper?
That's great. I'm wondering if there's any other questions coming along. I think one of the wonderful aspects of your book is that you have some guidelines about graphics and images and so forth as well, and how to make it clearer, as well as a bunch of additional resources to read to know how to present your graphics more clearly. I think that's a really helpful thing to know, because we quite often aren't trained to understand that as part of what we do in scientific backgrounds, right? I mean, you know how to generate something from Excel, but whether you can generate something from Excel that is easy to look at quickly and meaningful is another story.
Yeah,
You can't. You just can't from Excel.
remember that Excel has been designed for 20 years to add more and more and more and more stuff to it.
Uh-huh.
And the concept that I like is that of data ink. There should be no ink on the graphic that doesn't convey data. So funny lines, you should have labels right next to the things that they're being labeled, not a legend. A legend is really hard because you have to look away, and then you look back, and then you look away, and then you look back, and then you've lost the sense. Put the label right next to it. Things like that are simple to do.
Yeah. I'm reading Lee's comment, and that's so true. If you wait to deliver the punchline to the very end, you better be an amazingly good speaker, because your chance of losing somebody along the way is so great. So if you can give them a reason to care up front, and the benefit of all the work you've done as a researcher, as a scientist, all of the work that you've done leads you to know something that will be valuable to them. And if you can give them that and then help them appreciate why that should matter to them, that's the starting point for an effective presentation. And once you do that, then you can build in your examples. We talked earlier about messaging, and I think that this is a good place to say a little bit more about that. Your message needs to be tailored to what's going to matter to people. It needs to be the most important thing you want them to remember about your talk. And we often build talks by assembling slides we've done before. Instead, you need to step back and ask yourself, what's the main message? What do I want to deliver here? Our message today is that effective communication requires forethought. Every example we're giving you is the idea that if you think about this in advance, you're going to be more effective as a communicator. Don't just talk. Don't just leave it to chance.
Sandra, one of the things that really works is a little bit of video. Long videos are painful, but a 15-second video showing a train crashing into a wall, or your experiment, or things like this, it very, very compelling stuff. Your brains are image processing computers, and when you put images in and use moving images, people can get the information very quickly.
Yeah. The other thing for this Zoom format, when we do give talks with slides these days, we're making sure we have one idea per slide and we're able to switch slides quickly, because people expect that. And our world has just become so much more video and visually oriented. So the pace of something that someone looks at is important, especially during Zoom chats. And the other thing that I've spent a lot of time talking about of late is voice, because that's what we have.
Mm-hmm.
And being louder, being softer, pausing to make a point. All of those techniques in delivering your communication have become so much more front and center and vital in our Zoom world.
I have a feeling, I'll just mention that for those who are watching this as a recording afterwards, the question was about how to make virtual presentations in this Zoom world more effective. I was going to say, given that this conference has a whole bunch of presentations coming up, I bet there's a bunch of people thinking, oh my gosh, I got to redo my slides, get ready for that presentation. So I think we have a lot of good food for thought with the rest of the conference. I think I see we're at the top of the hour, and so I want to wrap up by thanking both of you for making yourself available for this. I want to thank our audience for joining, and also whoever the person is in the notes who's been putting in the notes document on the Keynote chat page all these good gems and takeaways for other people to see. What I wanted to mention also is that in the tabs along the top of that video, of the Kiko chat screen, there are a number of resources that Amy and Roger have provided, which includes a link to her course, which is she's providing a discount through the end of October to anybody who's here at this conference, and also a link to the book that they've written if you wanted to learn about that, and also recommended reading lists, which I thought were very helpful when I was reading the book. This is basically the bibliography, or not the bibliography, but the recommended reading list from the book is one of the tabs as well, plus a video about opening lines, which we've talked a little bit about today. And I also want to make sure I mention too that we have a learning lab coming on later today, and that will not be recorded. So if you want to come and interact with Amy and get some takeaways and advice and coaching, that's your chance, because it won't be something you can watch later. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you Amy and Roger especially for this great hour. It was fun.
It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the
Thanks.
time to get to know your community, and hopefully we've given you some inspiration to have more impact.
Yeah.
Good
Good luck
Yes.
to all of you.
Yeah.
And so we'll see you at the Learning Lab number 5, I think it is, in a couple hours.
I'll be
So,
there. Hope to see
awesome.
you there too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.